Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Tom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
All right, everyone, welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast. I am your host, Thom Jennings, and I have a very special guest. I'll give him a little bit of an introduction, kind of a personal introduction. Back in, I want to say 1981, I was attending a Bonnie Raitt show on the Green Light Tour at the Rochester Auditorium Theater. And, you know, when I was a young man, I used to really love hearing new opening acts that I wasn't all that familiar with. But actually, at the time, the John Hall Band, I think you were getting some airplay on MTV, but still have the record, still love it. And only later I found out you were from Orleans, which was probably your musical claim to fame at that point. But I may be one of those rare people that was introduced to John Hall and then Orleans, as opposed to Orleans and then John Hall. And I have followed your career, and well, I mean, we got a lot to talk about. But first and foremost, it's an honor, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here, John.
My pleasure, Tom. Thanks for asking me.
So, I mean, I guess from a starting point on a personal level, I mean, that tour with Bonnie Raitt, it was before, you know, she kind of had the career resurgence and everything like that, but just an incredible performer. I assume that you've known Bonnie for a while and probably have some fond memories of that tour.
I met Bonnie in New York City. I was playing with Taj Mahal at the bitter end. And after our show, he said, "You should go across the street. There's this young woman playing over at the Gaslight. You should hear Bonnie Raitt." So I took my guitar and had my little Princeton amplifier, old tweed Fender amp, and took them across the street. And I walked into the Gaslight. They just waved me in. Like another musician with his amp and his axe. So, and I walked in the dressing room, and Bonnie and Freebo were in there playing, warming up, doing some shuffle blues tune. And I sat down and plugged my amp in and played along with him for about 15 minutes. And then, I stuck my hand out after the tune was over and said, "Hi, I'm John Hall. I'm Bonnie. This is Freebo." And then the stage manager stuck his head in and said, 5 minutes. And Bonnie said, "You want to get up and play with us?" And I did. So the first night I ever met her, I played the entire set with her. And she's just been like a sister to me all these years. So that would have been 71 because That's the year I played with Taj.
Yeah, I mean, that's another great performer. You're talking about Taj Mahal. I mean, he's had some incredible material as well. I mean, you've really rubbed elbows with a lot of amazing musicians in your career.
I'm very blessed and very lucky in that regard. And, it's a lot of it is inspiration, a lot of it is perspiration. But you also kind of have to be at the right time, at the right place in any business. I guess the music business is the one I'm familiar with. And I played in the Village when I was in a band called Kangaroo ages ago, pre-Orleans, anything anybody ever heard about. And I was alternating sets part of that summer at the Cafe Wah with the band called the Castiles, which was Bruce Springsteen's band. And across the street, you could walk in the Kettle of Fish and see Tim Hardin having a beer with Bob Dylan. Around the corner at the Night Owl Cafe, where John Sebastian and the Loving Spoonful had just left to go on a real tour because they had a hit with Do You Believe in Magic? The replacement band for them was the Flying Machine, with James Taylor and Danny Korchmar playing lead guitar, and Joel Bishop O'Brien, who played drums on Carole King's first couple records and on drums, and my friend Zach Wiesner on bass. And around the corner on the Bleecker Street, Jimi Hendrix was playing as Jimmy James and the Blue Flames, backing up John Hammond doing straight blues. It was just, you couldn't write this stuff. I just, just as a 18-year-old, walked into that, took a Greyhound bus with another friend, guitar player up from DC, and wound up, moving through these situations. And I realize now, looking back at it, that it's pretty unusual. But I'm so grateful.
I mean, that's just incredible. I mean, I know that. I mean, obviously those clubs are all legendary. Cafe Wa and Bitter End, I believe. Hopefully, they made it through the pandemic. I know last time I was in New York City, I was able to go to those clubs. But man, those names. It's on some level. I know you're still active with Orleans and you're doing some shows and everything. But yeah, on some level, it's got to be frustrating to see the difference in that music scene now. It just seems like it's so much harder to find that level of talent in any area. Or is that maybe just an old guy talking?
Well, it's partly that. You might have seen that article in Rolling Stone, was it? Is the old music killing new music?
Yeah, I read that one.
Yeah. I mean, part of it's that we grew up, we were fortunate, I think, to grow up in a time when not only was there more of an emphasis on melody and harmony and lyrics, possibly, in my opinion, as an old guy, but also I used to be able to listen as a kid to an AM radio station in Elmira, New York, where I grew up, that would play on the same station. They would play James Brown into Patsy Cline. You know, they play Johnny Cash into the Beach Boys into Aretha. I mean, there was no cubbyholing of like, this is your smooth jazz and this is your classic jazz, or this is your R&B and this is your funk channel. And then, it was all just music. And I think it was easier to develop a broad taste for a lot of different kinds of music. And as was Duke Ellington, I think, said, there are really only two kinds of music, good and bad, in any genre. So that's how I look at it.
Well, I wonder too. I mean, I'm a little young in terms of like I wasn't old enough to see the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, but a lot of guys that I interview, they say that was a very seminal moment for them. That it inspired all those young guys to get guitars, your Hendrixes, your James Taylors, and because at that point, rather than it being like a out of reach dream, it felt like, here's these four working class guys from a small town in England. If they can do it, we can all do it. But the nation, I mean, you had less TV stations, so you really could capture the nation's attention. It just seems like that's so much harder for a band to do, to inspire a generation of musicians to even want to pursue music.
There's good news and bad news about that, because today, thanks to technology, everybody can make a record in their closet or their bedroom. And so that's kind of an advantage. And, one can post it so that it's available around the world on all kinds of different platforms. The problem is that there's so much content now out there. There's so many bands, so many new songs, new records, that it is difficult to cut through. On the other hand, people complain. My generation of musicians have been complaining for a long time about record companies and how do you get them to focus on the, what I might consider the good stuff, because a lot of times record companies would focus on something that I didn't get it. I would think, they're just looking for image. They're looking for something easier to sell than just good music. And I remember when I was with Cavallo and Ruffalo, big management company of out of LA. They managed Orleans for a little while and me for a little while when I went solo after 4 albums with Orleans. But Cavallo and Ruffalo had a stable, as they say, including Earth, Wind and Fire, The Emotions, Denise Williams, Weather Report, John Sebastian, Little Feat, on and on. It was just an incredible group of artists that they managed. And one day, the younger cousin, I guess it was, of these two guys, Steve Farnoli, went off to Minneapolis, and I saw him, and he was rushing to catch a plane. I said, "What are you doing there?" And he said, "I'm listening to this new artist that we're thinking we might sign." And so he went, and then A few days later, he came back, and I said, so how'd it go there? And he said, oh, it went great, man. You're not going to believe this. This guy's going to be the next biggest thing since the Beatles. He's going to be huge. And we just signed him for representation. And I said, what does he do? He said, he wears a pink jockstrap on stage. His name is Prince. And that's like, why do I practice? Why do I bother learning music? But, you know, Prince wrote some great songs and could really play just about any instrument. He's, you know, extremely gifted guy, rest his soul. But he found a way to cut through to get that. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I never really thought about sort of the early, I mean, some of his early stuff that he wrote was so over, you know, real sexualized and all that kind of stuff. I remember when it first came out, but yeah, you look back at the breadth of his career and he did some amazing stuff. I mean, he put out a lot of music, and he seemed to be a guy that, you know, I mean, fought record companies like we were talking about, did a lot of things that definitely died too young, but yeah, it's tough. You never know who the next Beatles or the next Michael Jackson or the next anybody is going to be. It's hard to see that in the future, you know?
Yeah. I wouldn't say he was the next Beatles. Well, there's not going to be a next Beatles.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm saying that you'd mentioned that they coined him as going to be the next biggest thing. I mean, he certainly never.
One guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. One guy from the firm said he'll be the next biggest thing since the Beatles. And he was pretty big.
Yeah, he definitely was. I definitely was not a huge Prince fan, but you know, I respect his work as an artist. But well, let's go back to Orleans because, I mean, you guys had. I mean, I remember growing up as a kid. At some point, I believe ABC Television had taken "Still the One" as a theme song for a while. I think today it's kind of a given. A lot of artists go, oh, you know, getting a placement on television and things like that can be very lucrative, and it can be help your career. I mean, at that point, was that something that helped you guys along, or was it just something that you were like, it is what it is?
I think any exposure for a song helps us along. It helped me and Johanna, my first wife and songwriting partner. It helped us along. Still the One has been that kind of song, though. It's been in movies. It's been in commercials. It keeps popping up. It's been used by a couple of different political campaigns that I had to stop from using it because they hadn't asked permission, and I was not politically in agreement with those candidates. But 1 year it was a commercial for Nutrisystem and Burger King at the same time.
Wow!
So you could lose weight and gain weight with Still the One. It's just a song that applies. It's like a slogan, you know. We didn't write it with that in mind, but it applies to a lot of different things.
Well, I think when you mention timeless songs, you know, songs that don't really they don't sound like a particular era. I mean, I think both, you know, both the biggest Orleans hits, Still the One and Dance with Me, they're both songs that are just good songs. I mean, they're good songs to sing. They're good songs to play on your guitar. They don't sound dated. I think that's where a lot of artists can run into trouble if they're just hopping on the current trend. And then as the train pulls out of town, the song it gets left behind.
Yeah. Those were not attempting to be on a trend. And we've written some other songs too that, obviously Love Takes Time, which was Larry Hoppins and Marilyn Mason's song, that band recorded when I was not with them. And it was a top 10 record. But there are also songs like Half Moon that was done by Janis Joplin and then by Chaka Khan and Rufus and by Fifth Dimension. And, that song's had a whole other life. And Give One Heart from the Let There Be Music album, which was recorded by Linda Ronstadt on Hasten Down the Wind, her best-selling album. And there have been, I'm happy to say, there have been other songs that went on to have another life. The song that Johanna and I wrote called Miss Grace was recorded by The Times, the vocal group, The Times, that had As We Stroll Along Together. holding hands and walking side by side. It's so in love are we two that we don't know what to do. Anyway, they did Miss Grace, and it was number one in England, and it's still on Rolling Stone's top 5 beach music hit list. Beach music meaning in the Southeast United States, Carolinas, right. Georgia, Florida, that kids who, or adults who dance the shag. It's kind of a dialectic regional dance form, but that kind of beach music, not Beach Boys beach music. But these things take on their own life, and Johanna says they're like our children. We try to bring them up well, and then they go out in the world and hopefully support us after we're old and gray.
That's really just a wonderful way to look at it. I mean, I've always had the sense that you were probably the thing that you're proudest of is your songwriting. I mean, it sounds like that's your craft. That's the thing that really makes you happy,
Yeah, that's, it's all really important and it's all exciting. Playing on stage is still exciting, but probably the most exciting thing for me is seeing a song take shape and being able to record it in some fashion and listen to it back or play it for somebody else. And that's sort of the beginning of the whole chain reaction that winds up with Still the One or Dance With Me or one of those tunes.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to move on to other aspects of your life and obviously the activism piece, which I think is incredibly important. And I remember when you were first elected to Congress, I was just kind of blown away. I was like, wow, there's a guy out here, I'm sure he doesn't represent my district, but Brian Higgins, who I imagine you guys probably worked together very closely being in New York State.
Did.
And
yeah.
I'd met Louise Slaughter, who was another very, very nice lady, and had the honor of meeting John Lewis before he passed away. Just found him in a restaurant in Los Angeles, just very nice guys. So, you hear a lot about politics being this really dirty business, but I don't know, I've met some really nice politicians, so I don't think you're a dirty politician. I mean, what did you have any reservations in terms of having to get into politics, run for Congress, and any of that other stuff? I mean, did it align with who you were with all the other activism that you'd been a part of up to that point?
Yeah, it did. I've been involved in the anti-nuclear movement, the safe energy movement, going back to before the No Nukes concerts in 1979. And I'm proud of the fact that we sang that song Power that Johanna and I wrote that starts out, just give me the warm power of the sun and steady the restless power of the wind and et cetera. It's all about renewable energy. And that song debuted in public at a demonstration at the Seabrook nuclear power plant site when it was being built, with me and Jackson Browne and Pete Seeger singing it, and a crowd of 20,000 people or so. So from that kind of thing to local activism, stopping junkyards, illegal junkyards from popping up in town of Saugerties, New York, which was where I lived just to the east of Woodstock, then after that, it was getting the first zoning law in the town written and passed. And I was involved in the writing of it as well, just as a citizen. I was not yet elected anything. And then we stopped a giant organization called the Winston Farm Alliance that I was one of the co-founders of, stopped a giant incinerator and landfill on the site of our last undeveloped farm in town of Saugerties. And that same year, I got elected to the Ulster County Legislature. It was the first time I ran for public office. And then I served one term and did not run again. And we managed to stop that particular polluting god awful project, and I wound up, just being a musician again for a couple of years, and then ran for school board because my daughter was in high school, freshman, sophomore, junior years on austerity because the voters had turned down the budget at the polls. And so I was determined that her senior year, at least, would be fully funded with normal class sizes and advanced placement languages or new computers or new band instruments or whatever people needed, new uniforms for the sports teams, all the stuff you have to cut when there's no money. And I was there for 4 years, was elected the first time as trustee, and the second time I was president, reelected as president of the school board. And every year I was there, we passed a budget. The voters passed it. We managed to come up with a budget that actually cut property taxes and still did what we thought that needed to be done for the students of the district. And so I'm proudest of that, really. And I think this is the most, in New York anyway, and I don't know if other states are like this, but you can't run as a member of a party. You run as an individual for a school board.
Right.
And so on some issues, your alliance might be with these 4 other people on a board of 9, or on a different issue, it would be, a different group of people. So you really have to persuade people, to agree with you or come up with some kind of a compromise that'll get the majority 5 votes out of 9. And that's really good training for any other political position. And then I wound up running after that for Congress in 2006. Had a bunch of years in between then, but by the time I ran for Congress, I knew a little bit about running for office.
Yeah, I mean, the term is, I think some people don't necessarily differentiate between like activism and protesting. Protesting is maybe a part of activism, but I think the thing that I've admired about you is that you've always been very active. It hasn't been just a case of you just write a song and say, well, I did my part, it's okay. I think a lot of times it's difficult for even individuals. They don't even know what to do in terms of how to make change. And maybe they just post something on social media and we may criticize them for that, but at least it makes them feel like they're doing something. But in your case, you really, you were just, if you saw you had a cause, you just went for it. It's pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, I'm that kind of guy. I basically, I don't think it's worth doing anything if you don't try to do it really well. And I learned to ski late in life so that I could go as a chaperone with my daughter's school group. And I wound up becoming an instructor. I wound up certified level 2 PSIA instructor. And at Hunter Mountain in the Catskills, I was instructor of the year in 1997, which I think means maybe that I taught more lessons than anybody else. I don't know if they were actually better lessons than anybody else, but yeah, I like doing things whole hog if I'm going to do them. And it's interesting, the whole thing about writing a song. Sometimes it can be more effective actually to write a song about something if you reach enough people with it. Way before I thought about running for Congress, did a demonstration on the steps of the Capitol as a nuclear freeze rally back in 1980 or 81 or something like that. And there were a number of politicians, elected officials there, Senator Ted Kennedy, then Congressman and now Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts, and others. And I had lined up a few musical acts. I think Run DMC was there, Pete Seeger was there, I think, and John Sebastian too. And I'd play some songs solo, and it was not a huge success in terms of turnout. It was it was a come down from the No Nukes experience, and I think people told me there wasn't enough time to organize it. I was trying to attract attention before the vote on the MX missile, the multiple reentry vehicle missile, which we pioneered, and now the other nuclear countries like Russia have built that too. But anyway, so afterwards we're packing up after the music is done, the speeches are done, and Ed Markey says to me and Pete, and my mother was there. Okay, my mother came. My parents lived in Maryland at the time, so she came into DC. So I'm packing up my guitar, and Ed Markey says, "You doing anything for lunch? Would you like to have lunch in the Capitol dining room?" And so I said, "Yeah." And Pete said, "That'd be great, thank you." And I said, "Mom, come on, let's go have lunch." So it was like a Fellini movie or something. We sat at this 4-top table in the Capitol dining room, and it was my mother, Pete Seeger, Senator, now Senator, then Congressman Ed Markey of Massachusetts, and me. And in the middle of this thing, I said, a bunch of my friends are suggesting to me maybe I should think about running for office, which was happening then, really, just basically coming out of No Nukes. People were saying, you're really good at this speechifying thing, other than rambling on too long, as you can tell. But,
not at all. Not at all.
So I said, I'm thinking of running for office. And Ed Markey says, no, we need you where you are. You're reaching way more people. And he said, what I want to do is I'd like to be, I'd like to be a newscaster. I'd like to be like Dan Rather, Edward R. Murrow. And I said, no, we need you where you are. And boy, that's the truth. I got to vote for the Waxman-Markey bill in 2009. It was the only piece of meaningful climate legislation that's ever passed the House of Representatives. And unfortunately, it never saw a vote in the Senate. And of course, in 2010, Democrats lost the Senate and the House majorities. And President Obama then had no chance of getting that passed. But I'm proud of the fact that I worked with Ed on that. I was on the Select Committee on Energy and Climate that Speaker Pelosi had established in her first time around as Speaker. But these windows for actually doing something and passing legislation go by. If you don't strike while the chance is there, while the iron is hot, you may never get a chance again.
Yeah, you brought up just a lot of great points. On some level, my head's a little bit reeling, but and as far as which one to go back to, but like I said, the concept of you're better where you are. I mean, as I said, somebody could make a post on social media that could have a bigger impact than somebody that's in Congress for 20 years. Maybe just because, like you said, it reaches people or it inspires people, and I think on some level too. I think you mentioned that maybe there is. As you get older and you see things that happen that you wish you could have prevented and nobody wanted to listen to you at the time, like you're talking about the MX missile, so, well, here's the warning. And even with, Russia invading Ukraine and looking at all the nuclear plants that are in the middle of a battlefield right now. It's all got to be pretty scary. Is there a level of maybe frustration that people didn't listen to this type of stuff, or do you accept the fact that, I did what I did. I did what I could. I made the changes that I could make.
I made the changes I could make, and people did listen to a great extent. Unfortunately, they didn't listen to the solar and wind part of it. Right. They listened in a way to the No Nukes part of it, and that's why there were, between then and just the last few years, there haven't been any new nuclear plants in the United States that were opened, that were put online or built. So there was the concerts were effective, the movie was effective, the the demonstrations were effective, et cetera, but only in that part of it, but not in getting. If we had started establishing all the renewables back then, we wouldn't be in the fix we're in today in terms of needing nuclear, but also in terms of being dependent on foreign oil or gas the way we are. Well, we're not really. We're still the biggest exporter in the world, but the price varies depending on the availability. So what's going on right now with Russia and Ukraine is that if there's a boycott on their oil, then the price of oil in the rest of the world goes up just because that much supply is taken off the market. I think that we'll hopefully get it together on the climate side. And it's really, as horrible as the war in Ukraine is, and it's horrible, what's going on with the environment, with the climate, is actually worse and will wind up killing many, many more people in the long run and doing more damage to all countries. The news today was, I don't know if you've seen this, but both the Arctic and the Antarctic are experiencing heat waves that have some parts of those two poles 50 to 70 degrees hotter than normal for this time of year. And given that the Antarctic is supposed to be summer now, it's not that surprising that there's melting there. But to have, we're going into summer, coming out of winter in the Arctic. The Antarctic is going into winter. It's like spring there. And to have this kind of extreme heat wave in both poles at the same time is something that the scientists that work on both of them say is unusual. It's unusual enough that they don't think it can be disconnected from an overall climate signal. Yesterday the story was another great bleaching event in the Great Barrier Reef. Yeah. And the truth is that every day there's another story like that. If you really read deep into the news, there's always, it seems like every day, yet another warning. And so this is something that, I have a daughter who's 7 years old. A granddaughter. My daughter's got a daughter who's 7 years old, and I worry about her generation and future generations. But she's gonna see the whirlwind that I'm not going to see. I just want to try to do the best I can to give her a chance.
Yeah, and I can relate. I mean, I have a granddaughter that just turned 4, and there are times where I just get lost in my thought process, and I go, man, like what's it going to be like in 10 or 15 years? And I think the hardest part is to see the polarization in terms of an issue that we all should be on the same page about, and how it gets so politicized. I mean, it's frustrating because I think in terms of like a thing like social media, it can do such good things. I mean, it really can help some people out, on a personal level. If somebody needs a fundraiser, or like I said, if you had a situation with, maybe when the situation with the dump was coming up near Saugerties or whatever, you can rally people. But then there's that dark side where you get people that they can spread disinformation and people buy it. And it's sad. You wonder what particular catastrophic event it's going to take for more people to be on the same page. And I think the reality is that 100% of the people will never be on the same page at the same time. And that's okay, because we're humans and we're different. But yeah, it's scary. I mean, I agree with you in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful, and there are a number of ways that this could work out and not be the worst case scenario. But we are already baked into probably 2.5, 2.7 degrees increase in global temperature, and the idea of staying below 3 is, the organization 350.org was founded to try to keep carbon dioxide from accumulating in the atmosphere to greater than that number of parts per million. And it's just, we're already past that.
Yeah.
So we're just going to all have to be ready to change. There's sacrifice involved. It's like we're being asked for Ukraine, to try to help Ukraine. We're being asked to sacrifice by paying a little bit more at the pump because the market is not picking up all those millions of barrels of Russian oil. So it's reduced supply, which increases the price if demand is constant. So that's a sacrifice. But we're going to all have to be willing to live in a house that's a little bit warmer in the summer and a little bit cooler in the winter. It's not just this, wearing a sweater indoors or, and drive a vehicle that's the most efficient you can, for your life and for your work, the things you need to do. We can't all be commuting in pickup trucks with one person to go to work. I mean, that's the kind of thing that just really, we all need to be thinking about and aware that, or one of my favorite bugaboos is leaving your car or your truck idling outside a convenience store while you go in and shop, or any store. I mean, a restaurant, takeout place. If you add all of those things together, you'll get a significant reduction. And we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, of course, nobody would wish for a pandemic to make this happen, but we saw carbon emissions go down when people started staying at home and isolating, and people were not working in person. Those who could work from home anyway were not working in person. There was a lot less commuting and no flights at all for a while. Airline travel was way off. But are we ready to sacrifice by not flying as much, by not driving our cars if we can, or by consolidating trips so that we only take one trip out a day instead of 5? There's sacrifice involved. And if we're not all aware of what the stakes are, we won't be ready to make the sacrifices that'll be necessary.
Yeah. Well, you've been very generous with your time, so I'll definitely wrap up and just thank you. I said just everything I hoped would be an interview. It's just been such great talking about such a variety of topics.